I want to welcome everyone to the 2023 NNLM Virtual Symposium on Health Misinformation. And I'm really glad you are able to join us here today. I know for a lot of our East Coasters, this will end a little late for you, so thanks for sticking around for it. My name is Bobby Newman, and I'm the Community Engagement and Outreach Specialist for the network of the National Library of Medicine, Region 6, which is at the University of Iowa. A few technical items before we get started. All attendees have been muted, but we do welcome your questions and comments in the Zoom chat at any time. Be sure to select everyone from the drop-down menu when posting your comments to ensure that all attendees can see them. VFairs is providing technical assistance for us today, and we have additional NNLM staff here keeping an eye on the chat with me. If you have questions for the speaker, please use the Q&A function to ensure that they do not get lost in chat. We also have live closed captioners for this event. You can access closed captions by clicking on the icon with the 3 dots and then selecting closed caption. If you would like to share on social media, we encourage you to use the hashtag for the event, HealthMisinfoNNLM. A quick word about who we are. If you've been in earlier sessions, you've probably seen this already, so I do apologize. The National Institutes of Health is the nation's leading medical research agency, and many of you might be more familiar with the National Center for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which is one of the many institutes and centers at NIH. NLM, or the National Library of Medicine, is one of the 27 institutes and offices of the National Institutes of Health. It is the world's largest biomedical library and produces online resources such as PubMed and Medline Plus. NNLM, the network of the National Library of Medicine, is an outreach program of NLM, and it works to ensure health professionals and the public have equal access to health information. NNLM is made up of 7 regional medical libraries, 3 national offices, 4 national centers, all of which provide training, funding, and engagement opportunities to our over 9,000 member organizations. It is my great pleasure today to introduce Dr. Katrine Wallace. She's an epidemiologist and faculty member at the University of Illinois Chicago School of Public Health. I am going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to her.
Okay, let's see if I can do this on the first try. All right. Thank you so much to the NNLM for having me. I really appreciate that you're doing this meeting series. It's a really important topic, and I'm very honored to be included. As she said, my name is Dr. Katrine Wallace, and I'm an epidemiologist from University of Illinois at Chicago. And some of you may know me from social media because I've been, throughout the pandemic, making videos about COVID-19, vaccines, epidemiology, and public health. And a lot of my talk today is from my own lived experience as a science communicator on social media. So what we are going to be talking about today is really reviewing misinformation and disinformation and what the difference is between those terms, why disinformation is such a widespread public health issue, and just learning strategies that can combat health misinformation. So from the way that I can see it, there's really 4 levels of how we can combat health misinformation. So, you know, you might be thinking, well, what can I do personally to fix this problem? But there is things that we all personally can do on the individual level. So let me get into it. Oops. All right, so first of all, let's just talk about like what misinformation is. So obviously information that is false, inaccurate, or misleading according to the best available evidence at the time. And this is important to say at the time because, you know, people will now retroactively say, well, you know, Dr. Fauci said at the beginning of the pandemic, like we didn't have to wear masks. And then that was misinformation because then he said we did, and things like that. You'll see that all the time on different social media platforms and things, basically kind of assessing misinformation by today's standards and putting that retroactively into the past. And we really can't do that. What we do is we assess information at the time that it was put out, and anything that doesn't line up with the current evidence, we call that misinformation. And that's a really important point, because you will see some disingenuous bad actors online trying to call things misinformation. I even get it done to myself, where people will pull up old tweets I made in like 2020 and be like, so is this still true? This didn't age well, and things like that. So we need to use a lens that's appropriate when we're calling things misinformation. And, just who is vulnerable to misinformation? The answer to that is everybody. Me, even though I debunk misinformation online all the time, sometimes you see something and you're like, is that true? It doesn't really matter who you are or how much you look at something, you are still vulnerable to misinformation. And I like this infographic from the United Nations Verified Initiative that basically just blacks out most of the story. And it just says, Little Red Riding Hood lived with a wolf and she lived happily ever after. Now, we know that's only part of the story, right? But this is what happens, and we're all vulnerable yet again. So belief in COVID-19 misinformation is more common than we think. And this was a survey that was done by the Kaiser Family Foundation, and it found that nearly 8 in 10 people, now not people that aren't vaccinated, just people taking the survey, believed at least one common falsehood about COVID-19 or about the vaccine, which was stunning to me. But that just shows how common these misconceptions are, that people who aren't like anti-vaxxers or, COVID denialists, like they would maybe pick out this list, and at least one of these things they thought might be true. And oftentimes health misinformation is posted on the internet or shared in text messages or emails and kind of just discussed as if it's fact, right? So another thing that's important to know is that about half of Americans get their news on social media, at least sometimes. So if you look at this is a survey that was published in 2022, but it was done in 2020 and 2021, which kind of explains why during the pandemic so much misinformation was propagated, because people are getting their news not just about COVID, but about everything on social media, about half the people in this survey. And, as you might remember, when we were in our houses during the pandemic, a lot of us really were on social media more than normal, because we didn't have that same level of connection we had when we would like go to the office. And maybe at the office, you would be like, oh, hey, did you hear COVID was fake or something? And someone at the water cooler would be like, nah, that's not true. There wasn't that kind of like societal checks and balances, because we were all at our houses on social media, and these algorithm driven platforms kind of sorted us into these groups of people who believed certain things. So this set a stage for misinformation for sure. And this survey shows that social media users are actually more likely to believe false information. So that compared to people who get their news in newspapers, TV, from their doctor, or from state or local leaders. So that's problematic. And again, because we were all on social media, it doesn't really take too much of a mental leap to see what's going on here during the pandemic. So social media, like I said at the beginning of this presentation, I've used it successfully to spread like health information, correct information, and to debunk misinformation during the pandemic. And I've been on all of these platforms that you see these icons on the left of the screen. And so for many people, it was a good outlet to spread good information and to receive good information. But, it does have its pros and cons. Like the pros is that in public health, our biggest goal is to meet people where they are. And that's how you create behavior change. You create people you meet people where they are, you kind of give them the information that they need to receive to make behavior change, right? So it was a good modality to communicate data and information to many people quickly and effectively for us science communicators. And it makes also important information and science information, or maybe some dense information, fun, right? Maybe people won't read a scientific paper, but they will watch a TikTok where I'm kind of showing a graph and explaining something with good music playing, or I'm roller skating or something like that, right? So it boils down information and gives it to people in a 1 minute dose instead of like a dense research paper. So those are some pros. Some cons are that people's attention spans on social media are short, right? Algorithm-driven platforms, like we said before, kind of sort people into what they're already interested in. There is harassment to people that want to, especially people like me that talk about vaccines online. And also misinformation tends to spread really fast because usually misinformation is kind of sensational viral content. So social media algorithms, like I mentioned on the previous slide, are based on engagement, and engagement will drive how often you personally will see something. So if you're somebody that likes cats and you are really into cats and like a lot of pictures of cats, then the algorithm is going to keep serving you pictures of cats, right? So people that have anti-science beliefs and are interested in conspiracy theories will be shown more of that kind of content, right? So I don't see that in my feed ever, but people send me these videos, but I don't get those videos because I like the other kind. Like I like things that are based in science, so I don't get served those videos, right? So the algorithms work to give you more of what you want. And so because of this, they're designed to keep people on the app. And it will favor these sensational viral videos. And very oftentimes misinformation will win over evidence and data, because somebody coming on saying like masks don't work, that's going to go viral, right? But me kind of giving the science of how masks work is not as interesting and sexy of information as, somebody that's going against the grain. So that's why these algorithms kind of fuel this problem. So also, now you've probably heard that there's this proposed TikTok ban, and this is kind of relevant because there's people that are proponents of this ban cite two different concerns. And for anybody that doesn't know, TikTok is a social media platform where it's videos, and you kind of just scroll. If you don't like a video, you scroll, and then, it'll keep serving you videos via this algorithm. And that's where I put out most of my content, and then I repost it on other networks. So proponents of the TikTok ban cite two general concerns. One is that kind of a privacy concern, that TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, is a Chinese company, and that the Chinese Communist Party may get access to our information. And the second concern is that some politicians in the US are concerned that the Chinese Communist Party is controlling this algorithm that they have to target propaganda and more disinformation to US users. So a point that people keep repeatedly pointing out to in these hearings is that even if TikTok was owned by a US company, the US has almost no legal regulations on how social media companies collect and share personal information or these algorithms. There's no regulations about these algorithms at all. So it could even happen if TikTok was a US company, and in fact does on the Meta platforms or any of the other ones. So it's very interesting. There's also a social media now, this is another kind of new thing, is that there's now a social media verification problem. So it used to mean when you had a blue check mark next to your name that your identity was checked by the social media platform and that you are a verified user. They check to make sure you are who you said you were. And usually it was a hard process to go through. You had to be like a notable person, and you had to be associated with a university or something like that. So medical creators with blue check marks were affiliated with a bona fide institution. So now this has been kind of turned on its face, and platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram are now selling blue check marks as a status symbol. And so now anybody can pretend they're me and verify that account and start posting whatever they want. And there's nothing I can do about it. So it's a way that misinformation continues to spread on social media under these verified accounts that are only verified because they purchased the verification. So there's other places too besides social media that misinformation is spread, and that are things like speeches. You've seen videos of people at school board speeches talking, pamphlets, posters. I have an X across this one, but it's basically an anti-vax thing about vaccines with all these awful things that are supposedly in vaccines. Like it just, there's no end to the energy on that side for churning out misinformation content. There are news outlets that are just basically dedicated to churning out propaganda and false information. We'll talk about some of those. Advertisements, books, and even face-to-face conversations. So it goes across the board. So social media is one piece. I'm just recognizing that it's happening a lot of other places too. Okay, so let's talk about what is misinformation versus disinformation. So disinformation, so they both involve the sharing of false information, right? But sometimes misinformation can be spread intentionally to serve some kind of malicious purpose. So whether that's to trick people into believing something for financial gain or some kind of political advantage or money, this is called disinformation. And so between misinformation and disinformation, the difference there is just the intent, right? So your aunt who's forwarding a meme on Facebook because she saw her neighbor forwarding it and she thinks it might be true, that's not disinformation, because at least from her, because she really probably believes it's true and is just forwarding it on and propagating the bad information. The person who created that or first came up with this whole, whatever the misinformation piece was, probably did it in order to convince somebody of something for political gain or financial gain. And that person is the disinformation spreader. So who spreads disinformation? Why would somebody do that, right? So doctors, politicians, celebrities, and activists all convey false information, and not uncommonly with selfish motives. So there's this great article from the Washington Post that I highly recommend from 2021 about how wellness influencers are fueling the anti-vaccine movement, because they have all these wellness influencers, they have storefronts on their pages, and they all sell like supplements and books and all kinds of things. So this really, the anti-vaccine movement was kind of an opportunity for the wellness industry to kind of just keep, the momentum. The pandemic gave them a lot of momentum. And this report was done by the Center for Countering Digital Hate, the Disinformation Dozen, where they went through Instagram posts of anti-vaccine content for a certain number of months and found that this group of 12 individuals was responsible for originating about 65% of all anti-vaccine content on Instagram. And they did this follow-up report because people were like, well, why would they do that? What's the reason? And like I just said, their social media page serves as a storefront, and it's a huge industry which only increased over the course of the pandemic. So they sell anything from books to coaching to supplements, beauty products, telehealth visits to get off-label, ivermectin and things, non-evidence-based treatments for COVID. So, and the beautiful thing for them is that no sales force is needed for them to sell their products, because people will share their memes and infographics on social media for free. And as an example down here is Joe Mercola, who was #1 on the list. He makes millions of dollars on his social media, via his social media channels, funneling people to his website where he sells pretty much all the things on that list. But so that's why those people spread disinformation. But why do normal people spread misinformation? Like what do everyday people have to gain, right? So most of the misinformation online is spread by normal people who actually don't know that the claims they're spreading are false or misleading. And I know this from discussing things directly with people who will come on my page and try to, argue with me about something. And then when I push back and say, well, this study says this, this, and this, they have no idea any studies were ever even done. They're just parroting information that they saw from these disinformation spreaders, right? So they're forwarding stuff that that was shared by someone else that they know. And they probably think they're helping. They probably think they're helping other people by being like, this is crazy. This vaccine is dangerous. They probably think it really is dangerous and that they're helping. So many people may be raising a concern, also trying to make sense of conflicting information. This is something that I truly think doesn't get enough discussion. I think the pandemic was very scary for people. And I think, not understanding the complicated immunology and science really led a lot of people to take the path of the least resistance to a conspiracy theory, just like, oh, well, maybe it's all fake. That's a lot easier to grasp for people than a deadly virus that's spreading and mutating, right? So at the beginning of the pandemic, I think a lot of people probably just wanted to make sense of very complicated, dense information that scared them. And that seemed like, oh, okay, I can grab onto that and understand it, So, and some people are seeking answers to honest questions. There are a lot of people that are just asking questions online that are not genuine questions, but I think some people really do, at least did have honest questions to start with. So people like to feel like they have new information that other people don't know. So like this person who's tweeting, the doctors are hiding important information about the vaccine. Listen to this one nurse and what she has to say about it. How many of you have heard that? This one healthcare professional, the fringe healthcare professional that comes online and says that something's dangerous when the rest of the medical community is saying otherwise, right? So people also want to protect the people that they care about, right? So, this person saying like, I admit it, sometimes I share things without checking first, but honestly, I feel like it's better to be safe than sorry. So people just forward things because they think they're helping. Also, people may be seeking explanations or wanting to share information that helps them make sense of events like we just talked about. People also want to feel connected to others. And this is another thing that kind of really proliferated during the pandemic, is these connections people made with others online who believed the same things that they believed. So what can we do, right? What is the strategy to help? What can we as people do to help this problem? Because it's obviously a huge problem. So it's easy to feel like, I can't do anything about it. So, so like I said at the beginning, there's a multi-layered approach to how we can deal with misinformation. And there's the personal level, interpersonal level with other people, community level, and then a policy level. So let's talk first about what we personally can do. We can verify information before we share it. And this is really important. And like I said, even for me, who does this every day, all the time online, I see things sometimes and I'm like, really? And then, you have to check everything very carefully, read stuff. Misinformation can be really hard to detect. So this United Nations Verified Initiative infographic basically is, before you share, verify before you amplify, right? Who made it? What is the source? Where did it come from? And why are you sharing this? When was it published? Make sure it's current. All these questions you can ask yourself before just sharing something. And just because somebody that shared something, just make sure you still check it. Another thing you can do is check the CDC or your local public health department to see whether there's any information about whatever claim is being made. So if people are saying, oh, the vaccine is causing XYZ, and this one nurse online is saying this, well, you can check all this information is verifiable, right? Because we have it all on these government websites, which is really nice. They have the good, the bad, the side effects, everything is on the website or in the product label, which is on the FDA website. Making sure the information is current, checking the dates, making sure that you're not sharing an old picture of, Barack Obama in a laboratory that says, oh, this was him at the Wuhan lab or something, and it's not, so making sure that what information you're sharing, just because it has a caption doesn't mean the caption is correct. Asking a credible health professional, such as your doctor or nurse, if they have any additional information. This is another thing, people before the pandemic, I feel like would ask health professionals about health issues, but now it seems like the information is moving faster than we can actually double check things, right? So you might not have an appointment with your doctor, but maybe you can send them a message on, if you really were worried about a vaccine or something, you could send a message on the portal or something and just ask, is this true what I'm hearing? And also, just taking care before you share. Is the information stated by a credible source? You can type the claim into a search engine to see if it has been verified by at least one verifiable source, like the Mayo Clinic here, or the NIH, or the CDC. If you type something in and the only thing you find are the Daily Mail and things like that, red flag. So, for example, if the info is only on one website and it's kind of a sketchy website, it's probably not true. And you can go to the About Us on the website page and see if you can trust the source. So if you find something like this website and it says the expose was set up due to the lack of alternatives in the lying mainstream media, that's probably propaganda, right? So you can disregard that claim. So another thing is make sure the person making the claim is actually an expert, right? Are they board certified in the area that is being talked about, right? Have they published papers in that area? Do they have an appointment somewhere? And are they actually treating patients? There were a lot of doctors coming forward that didn't treat COVID patients, that actually weren't board certified anymore. No papers about COVID, that were making these claims and using this appeal to authority, like I'm a doctor, listen to me, and, spreading misinformation, and we're actually selling things or, aligned with some other organization. So just be careful that the person making a claim, just because they have letters after their name, is an actual expert in whatever they're talking about. All right. So the interpersonal level, talking to friends and family. So communication is really important. And sometimes we may not fully understand why someone is doing what they're doing. And when it's in your family, it's really difficult. Their intentions can be mixed, unclear, or even change over time. And they may not fit nicely into a category like, oh, anti-vaxxer. Maybe somebody has had every single vaccine, but is spreading crazy misinformation just about the COVID vaccine, and this person's in your family. And what do you do? So rather than quickly jumping to conclusions or calling them out, it's good to try and listen. It's hard. I will tell you that because I do this all the time with people. Try to listen first and try to engage that person in conversation and ask them questions like, well, why would it be like that? Or, try to get them talking about what they're saying. And so listening with empathy is really important to get people to change their mind about something. So imagine your friend is worried about potential side effects they read online from the flu shot. The source they read it on is not reliable. So the first thing we would do is listen to the person's concerns, listen to their fears, their beliefs, and focus on the wider issue and how they feel. Remember that fact check immediately right out of the gate shuts down any conversation. So then empathizing with the person, emphasize the fact that you understand why people find it difficult to trust, because, a lot of people don't trust the healthcare system for a myriad of reasons, cultural and their past history and things like that. So it's important to empathize that, yes, you get that. And you understand that, big pharma is not always, you've heard bad things about it in the past. And yes, these vaccines are made by a pharmaceutical company. So you understand why there'd be hesitation there. So empathy, it's important. Ask questions to the person to understand a little bit more, get them talking. And then they might understand as they're answering your questions that what they're saying doesn't really make a lot of real logical sense. Admit possibly that you yourself have struggled with different decisions that you made. Talk about a time when you yourself believed misinformation so they don't feel judged. You can also help by providing good information. So imagine your uncle has been diagnosed with some serious illness and is convinced that some obscure cure being sold online will help him. So you obviously know that's not probably the best route to go. So you might want to point that person to credible information. Underscore that finding accurate information can be hard, even for you, and emphasize the need to really look at credible sources and experts, and remind them that an expert on one topic, like we just talked about on a few slides ago, may not be the best expert on another topic, or a celebrity might not be a good expert on whatever their disease is. So it's really important not to use shaming language or tone. And I have actually, I will admit, come a long way with this, because at the beginning, I would just assume every question was disingenuous and be like, oh yeah, right. But you really have to kind of imagine that everybody's kind of coming at this from everybody's on their own journey, right? So in this one, like, imagine your neighbor seems to have started following conspiracy communities online and is starting to believe outlandish claims. So an important thing is just to not shame people. Try to have conversations, again, like the listening with empathy, having conversations in comments under social media posts is not going to work. Firing off comments on social media is just going to backfire. Being gentle and empathetic, shaming is definitely counterproductive. It'll just get them more entrenched in their beliefs. So also, this is a good way to kind of get people to understand what you're saying. And it's called the truth sandwich approach. So if you imagine your sister has been reading a news source that reports misleading statistics, cherry-picked and out of context, and she's saying she won't get the new booster because she read that it's dangerous. So this is the way you would do it. You would sandwich the misinformation between two truths. So you start with the truth, the first frame gets the advantage, right? And then you can indicate that some people have been spreading misinformation. Avoid amplifying the information, but you can say you understand that there has been misinformation. And then you return to the truth. Always repeat the truths more than once. Also, using inclusive language is important. Like if you imagine an old friend from your high school friend group is sharing misinformation about some fad diet that you think is extreme and potentially dangerous, you could show how you also sometimes struggle use language that makes it clear that you might be impacted if it's appropriate. You don't want to like make everything about you if it's something that has nothing to do with you, but explain that you care about their well-being without shaming them, right? It's difficult to do. All right, so what can we do as communities on the community and organizational level? So we need to make sure that people have kind of education on risk benefit somehow, because humans are very bad at assessing risk. So like, for example, with COVID, the risk of COVID was perceived as very low, but the risk from the vaccine was perceived as very high. And this was like sort of a naturalistic bias, like a man-made risk was perceived as worse than a natural risk, like natural immunity from the disease, which of course we know is not true. People, more than 1 million people have passed away from COVID. We know that, the vaccine is safe. So this is just a risk perception problem. And people also have this optimistic bias where they think their own risk is less than that of other people. How many times have you heard people say, oh, I'm young and healthy, right? I'm young and healthy, I don't need to XYZ. So education on risk benefit is really important. Education on news literacy, so important. And I work with this group, the News Literacy Project, where they produce news literacy education modules for high schools, colleges, and adult education, teaching people how to fact check news sources, what's a good source versus not a good source, and teaching people what are reliable sources. So this would be great if we could get this get people young understanding news literacy. And a lot of people don't even realize that where you're getting your news from really matters, right? So you have all kinds of leanings to different news sources. And a lot of people, I'm sure, have no clue about this. So it's just, news literacy is so important. Also, schools need to reprioritize science education. And here's some pictures of me. But the reason I'm including this is because science communication for myself in 2020, my first time talking to like non-scientists about science was shocking, and it had a lot of challenges, and I was not prepared. So the public, in my eyes, was very vulnerable to this co-epidemic of misinformation spreading, because when I started coming online and talking about, different things, public health, epidemiology, people were asking me questions that I was like, oh, I need to make a series of just basic videos about science, because people didn't understand levels of evidence, like that a clinical trial, those data are better than like an anecdote on Facebook that someone's saying because they're a nurse or something, and like how science even works. Like once we collect more data, then we have a new set of, we have a new assumptions, right? So yes, maybe we didn't wear masks right at the beginning of the pandemic, because at that point we were assuming that COVID was like the flu or, other respiratory viruses, where when you're actually symptomatic, you're spreading the virus. But we didn't know that there was this pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic type of spread. But once we learned that from studies, then masking was recommended, right? So this is how science works. It evolves and the field moves on, and the recommendations from the CDC will change as we get more data. And in our case, with COVID, the virus itself changed, right? So recommendations have changed based on the virus changing too. So this wasn't a real widespread understood concept, I would say, which was a little bit shocking to me, right? That the scientific method was not really fully appreciated by lay people. And then like study designs, like just basically, it was very interesting to me. So I had to do a lot of just basic science education. And then obviously digital literacy, we have a kind of a digital divide. It's a key skill for anybody that wants to, look and find information online or share information. And there's actually room for improvement along all age groups, from digital natives to older adults. But the needs will change community to community. Recruiting trusted advocates is another good way for communities to work. This is two good examples, like barbershop vaccine clinics for COVID, and then also some bars in the LGBTQ community were, doing education on monkeypox vaccines. So these are good ways that you can recruit trusted advocates within your community to help spread good information. And doctors, obviously, people trust their healthcare providers. They can steer patients to the evidence, correct false beliefs. I think every doctor should take 2 minutes and ask their patient, are you up to date on your vaccines in their visits? And they can share info beyond their office too. They can do newsletters, email blasts, Instagram posts, anything like that. So countering misinformation at the source is also important. So flooding social media platforms with empowering narratives full of accurate information, good information, positive stories. You can pre-bunk, debunk, or do education on the platforms. And pre-bunking is basically just not waiting for bad information to start combating it. You can look ahead to see if you can predict narratives that might take root and get good information out first. It's kind of hard to do, but now that I've been doing this for 3 years, I know as soon as I see a study in the media, I'm like, okay, people are going to misconstrue that. So that's when you start to, pre-bunk. So then importantly, don't give misinformation the mic. So don't give airtime to bad information. And this is hard for me too, because sometimes you get a lot of questions, basically just what about this? And it's misinformation. So it's really hard to make a video where you're debunking something without talking about it. So it's kind of hard to do in practice, but if you need to cite it for context, just make sure you center the accurate information using that truth sandwich approach. All right, so what can government do? And this is probably the shortest section because honestly, California has passed a law that physicians and surgeons who spread COVID-19 misinformation directly to their patients will be held accountable. And a lot of people came to, oppose this rule, but it's strange that they would want to fight for the right to spread misinformation about COVID. It's very strange, but there was a lot of people that didn't like this. This is another law that seems to be stalled, but this was basically Educating Against Misinformation and Disinformation Act that was introduced in March of 2022, which basically would require secondary and higher education programs to include news literacy. And this would be great. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. And one thing that would super help is that if we revised Section 230 of Title 47 of the Communications Decency Act. This was done in 1996. And in this section, it says no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of that information. So basically, this means that online platforms like social media, like Spotify, like Netflix, like any online platform are protected against a range of laws that might otherwise be used to hold them accountable for what other people say and do on their platforms. So they have no responsibility for anything put on their platforms. And this rule was put into place in the 90s when really we could not have envisioned what was to come, right? With social media, at that point, we had websites with like a little comment section, right? Or maybe chat rooms or something. We have definitely outgrown this legislation. And Amy Klobuchar actually introduced this Health Misinformation Act of 2021 to actually get them to do something about this. And the Supreme Court, during all this TikTok stuff, actually were talking about Section 230 as well. It's huge. And it would be, if they change that, it would be very, very detrimental to the social media companies that are making millions of dollars off of misinformation from advertisers. So I'm thinking I'm right on time here. So what we can do about misinformation is we have these 4 levels of societal response to misinformation, and all play a different role. We personally can verify information before we personally share it, right? We can support our loved ones, our friends, our family with good information. We can help them find good information. We can listen, we can empathize. Community level, we can educate and we can advocate. And the policy level, that's where we would legislate. And we all have the power to shape our information environment, but we have to use that power together. All right. I probably
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
I went really fast, I think, but I wanted to make sure I covered everything.
No, it was great. And I really loved that you had specific examples, especially with how to address things like with family members or that type of thing. So yeah, so we have about 14 minutes. So we have some time for Q&A from our attendees. So if you have a question, please just use the Q&A function so we don't lose them in chat, although chat has been pretty quiet in this session. We're winding down for the day.
Yeah. I know. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with me. I tried to make it interesting.
I thought the information too about people's responses, you know, that just immediately calling them out or shaming them for sharing misinformation doesn't work was really helpful.
Well, I've learned that from experience. I was not very good. I was not expecting to have to be doing that at all, you know, so it was sort of interesting. Like the only science communication I had ever done is in a classroom before the pandemic. So, you know, it's not like I get trolling comments from my students. So it was a very new experience for me to have people like disagreeing with me to such a degree in my comment section.
Yeah, that would be very weird if students were doing that.
You know, so it's like I was, and then, you know, I got people in, you know, mostly graduate students. So they had some sort of background in science before they came to my class. So I didn't really have to argue about these things that, you know, were just taken for granted by the time you get to a master's program, you know.
So we have a question from an attendee. Most scientists are poor communicators. Where did you learn to be a science communicator?
Oh, that's so nice. That's sort of a compliment. So I've always been sort of I guess that I teach class. So I did teach for several years. So that helps because I'm not weird talking in front of people or anything like that. I'm not like scared or nervous. But I've always been sort of a outgoing person. And when I was a kid, I was always performing and things. So I think actually social media sort of weirdly marries all my skill sets. So I can talk about science, but I can also be expressive. And so I sort of like it for that reason, because science doesn't really give you a whole lot of opportunity to be creative, but social media does. So it's really nice. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and we're reading a book we're also having a book discussion right now on a book called Bad Advice that talks about the struggles that scientists have communicating with the public. So that was a really interesting question. And I agree, you do a great job.
Oh, you guys are so sweet.
Another question from an attendee. Can you speak to the role that podcasts from influencers have played in spreading or debunking misinformation? For example, Joe Rogan had Dr. Osterholm as a guest, and then more than a year later invited him back again. These are two people with podcasts and followers of their own that sort of impacted they did impact everyone's decision or people's decisions on what to do around COVID.
So that's a great question. And I have a lot to say about this topic because some of you may remember that we wrote a open letter to Spotify it started with 250 of us and it was 1,000 by the time we finished the whole process. Scientists and healthcare professionals who were opposing the spreading of misinformation on Spotify's platform. And really, because of the Joe Rogan podcast having so many millions of subscribers, he would have people like, he did have Dr. Osterholm on, who isn't spreading misinformation, but he also had Dr. Robert Malone, he had Dr. Peter McCullough, people who are basically talking about vaccines being cytotoxic, that they're causing organ damage, like just things that had absolutely, talking about ivermectin, just stuff that had absolutely no basis in science. And the day that the Robert Malone episode went live, it was like a New Year's Eve of, I think, 2022. I had like 500 people sent me that, at least on Instagram, on my email. Like I was flooded. And we were like, we need to do, because this is the same as this Section 230. They have no responsibility for this information that's being put on their platform. Spotify's just like, what? We don't police, we're, whatever. So we wrote this letter just asking them to please put a misinformation policy in place. We're not asking anything to be deleted. So they now have labels on they removed a bunch of old stuff. Unfortunately, the Robert Malone podcast is still on there, but it is labeled now. So we did do something, but yes, I agree. Podcasts are just another online mechanism of misinformation spreading. And when somebody has a platform the size of Joe Rogan, it is causing what we call false balance, right? So it's like he's got such a huge microphone that him saying something wrong is getting amplified to such a huge degree that it seems like there's two sides to the scientific information, when really there's not. The vaccines have been shown to be effective. They've been shown to be safe. But when anti-vaccine information is on a platform of that size, it's a huge problem.
Okay, and we've got another question. How would you manage scientific literacy barriers when trying to talk about misinformation? I find that to be a challenge sometimes when trying to address misinformation with peers and friends. It's quite difficult to get into odds ratios, p-values, etc.
Yeah, I agree. So it's hard even talking about that with my students. So I understand. I don't talk about that. Statistics, I kind of pretty much leave out of conversations about misinformation unless it's really necessary. So, I would just say with the person spreading misinformation, if they're misinterpreting statistics, which happens a lot, I would explain why that's a misinterpretation and why that's not a proper way to do the analysis. But I would leave out, if you're just trying to say, oh no, vaccines are safe because, this is in this statistical test, like people are going to glaze over, right? I would just say, oh, we've had, this many studies now showing that this is safe in pregnant people. And, we know that COVID is really dangerous in people that are pregnant. So we want to make sure those people are vaccinated, and you could send them sources too, if they want to look at that themselves. But I try to stay away personally from doing a methods kind of response, because people aren't going to respond well to it. I just talk about the sweeping conclusions of studies pretty much.
Great, thank you. All right, I'll give it another second here. And if not,
These are good questions. You guys are making me think.
Me too. It's been a while since I've been in a stats class. I was like, p-value.
Yes, p-value. Yeah, but there's a lot of people that will misinterpret statistics and send you something that's like, that's not statistically significant. And then you look at it and you're like, what are you doing? Yeah, so that happens. And if those people come to me, then I'll give them a stats answer.
So I want to thank everyone for attending and the great questions that you all asked during this session. Thank you to Dr. Wallace too. We really appreciate your time here today. Just a few things before we wrap up. If you're interested in claiming continuing education credit from the Medical Library Association or the CHES credits or CPHCE credit for this session and others, you will receive an email after the symposium ends with a questionnaire and instructions on how to claim CE. We will also be sharing that link in the last session tomorrow afternoon. So if you're in a hurry to get it, you can attend that session and grab it there. Our next session starts tomorrow morning at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, and we are having our final keynote of the 3-day event. That is it. So I would just encourage you all to take some time this evening to maybe get outside and enjoy some fresh air, and I appreciate your time and attention here today. Have a great evening.
Thank you.